Up to now, we've stood on the White House lawn, we've hugged each other and signed all kinds of political agreements, but there's never been an agreement between people. Once you really begin to know the person on the other side and you understand their needs.
We will answer your questions.
And they see your humanity.
What is the ceremony?
It changes a lot. There was just a year and a month difference between David and Iran. In the case of all young men in Israel, they had to go to the army. And so they actually were both in the army at the same time. Most Israeli kids, they go away for a year to forget. It's very difficult, it's traumatic. When David came back, he was doing his master's in the philosophy of education. And then he got called to go to reserves. And he came to see me. He didn't want to serve in the occupied territories. He was the officer. If I don't go, what will happen to my soldiers? And if I do go, then I will treat people with dignity, and so will all my soldiers. You know, we don't really know who the person is behind the gun. He went to serve, and he was killed by a Palestinian sniper, along with 9 other people. When the soldiers came to tell me that David had been killed, one of the first things that I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child. The minute that I recognized that a Palestinian mother who'd lost her son felt exactly the same as I did, there was no difference, the tears were the same, everything was the same, so why could it not be a powerful weapon for us to make change? I wanted to do something to prevent other families from experiencing this pain. We are 600 families who've all lost an immediate family member to the conflict. What we believe is that there must be, in any future political agreement, some framework for a reconciliation process, because up to now we've stood on the White House lawn, we've hugged each other and signed all kinds of political agreements, but there's never been an agreement between people. This is something that we have to have. One of the worst things that we experience in Israel and Palestine is that we don't know each other. This not knowing is what creates a fear. The fear creates hatred, and the hatred creates violence.
The organization gets criticism from both sides. One is that the organization is only supporting a Palestinian agenda. The other main criticism is that it's working with the occupier.
We run a project in the Parent Circle, a parallel narrative. We wanted to experience the narrative of the other, how we see our history. So we went to the Holocaust Museum. That's not for comparison of suffering, but that's to understand, because if you don't understand that part of the Jewish history, you will never understand the DNA of fear. Then we went to a Palestinian village which existed before 1948 and is now Israel. And 2 of the families from our group came from there. And one of the mothers stood and she looked down and she found the well and she started to cry and she said, "This is where I drew water when I was a child." You begin to create an empathy for how the other sees their history. And if all our politicians would do that, can you imagine what a difference that would make? I started to travel all over the world and met extraordinary people and thought I was quite a big deal. It's very easy to go around the world talking about peace and reconciliation. And then I came home one night from the States and I had another knock on the door from the army, and they came to tell me that they caught the man who killed David. So here was a man in jail, and here I am talking about reconciliation, and am I willing to walk the talk? It took me about 3 months, and then I wrote a letter. I told them who David was and who I was, and that I was part of the Parent Circle, and that we needed to meet. We owed that to our children and grandchildren. And I thought immediately, of course, the next day I'll get a letter from the sniper. Of course, that doesn't happen. There's no such thing as instant reconciliation. It's not coffee. It took about 3 years, and I got a very difficult letter back from the sniper to say that I'm mad and I should stay away from his family. But an extraordinary thing happened. Once I wrote that letter, it was as if I gave up being a victim. It's not that I don't still want to meet with him, I do. But I cannot be contingent on him being repentant. So it's being at peace with yourself and allowing yourself to be free, to move on. Coming here and sensing that there are so many Palestinians who have lost in the audience and so many Israelis, but yet we can sit together, and if we can, surely that should be an example for other people. The work that we do is to prepare people to understand the humanity of the other. We work in schools with kids. If you will go into an average classroom of 17-year-olds in Israel, and you'll say, who's ever met a Palestinian? It'll probably be nobody. And who speaks Arabic? Maybe one, because their grandmother came from Iraq. And who's been overseas? Probably 80% of the class. So for the first time in their lives, they actually meet a Palestinian physically in their classroom who tells the story of their path to reconciliation. They suddenly see the humanity in that other person. There has to be a way where people will feel their own dignity. I don't really know of another group in the world that does this kind of work during the conflict. I'd be very happy to have a permanent ceasefire, but if it came along with some form of reconciliation, I might be much more confident about the future of my grandchildren.
In Israel, helping a neighbor can be as simple as refusing to hurt them. Age-old conflicts are being challenged by a new wave of citizens set on peace. Israelis and Palestinians alike are reaching across political and cultural lines. Like modern-day Good Samaritans, they set aside their prejudices and risk their reputations to save lives. How far would you go to help your neighbor?
Hey, I'm Mati Shoshani, and thank you for watching the TBN Israel YouTube channel. We hope this video gave you greater understanding of Israel and her people. If you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. We'd love to hear from you, so be sure to share what you've learned and ask your questions in comments below. And invite your friends to join the conversation.